Okay, so good evening all. It's Deborah Kresniansky from Adai, and with me I have Dr. Shana Frydman from Shaolin Task Force. And I'm really excited about this talk. I mean, I'm not excited about the topic, but I'm excited that we're covering this topic. With COVID happening, domestic abuse numbers have gone up somewhat. Let's just use the word somewhat. And there's a lot going on, and I think that's important for us to really recognize what is happening for the people who are in these situations, what is domestic abuse, and how we could be supportive. Recently, Dr. Frydman, Shana wrote an article, a great article by the topic of community has power, the power of the community. And we're going to talk about that in this series. Tonight we'll be talking with Dr. Shana Frydman about that. And in a few weeks, we'll be talking with Adai Levin, also from Shaolin Task Force. And so as we get into the topic, first, I'm really excited about the new Shaolin Task Force, the new and enhanced Shaolin Task Force headed by by Shana these days. So there's a lot new happening. So Shana, do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening at Shaolin Task Force and what Shaolin Task Force can provide for the community?
Absolutely. Deborah, thank you for having me tonight. I too, it's exciting to be here, though it's always a difficult topic to speak about, but when we talk about the community having power, it's really about destigmatizing these conversations and making it okay to talk about it so people can get help. So here we are, becoming empowered together, acknowledging it, learning to be supportive to one another who we're going through hard things. So Shaolin Task Force may be familiar to some of you. And it may not be. Shaolin Task Force is a nonprofit in the Jewish community that serves the Jewish community that's here to combat domestic violence and foster healthy relationships. And we really do that through 3 key core services. That's our hotline, which has newly expanded to include text, chat, and WhatsApp. And my staff's going to kill me. I always forget to remember down the number, but I'm going to get it for you in a second. And we're available most days between 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. And we're there to listen, to validate what's going on, to help people think of things through, and then help them get to, if they want to, a place to explore things further. And there's never any pressure to share who you are. It's absolutely confidential. And you have the ability to just talk. And often people who call are not the people who are being hurt themselves, but very often it'll be people in the community, family, friends, other professionals who notice something that's going on and they say, I want to be helpful, but I don't know how. And we'll often, we can help with that as well. So the number is 888-883-2323. That's a phone number. It's also WhatsApp and text. So since we've expanded to WhatsApp and text, we're able to help people internationally, which is very exciting. People are reaching out. And we find that sometimes it's easier to talk about these issues by writing. And that might be the first step that someone needs to be able to say it out loud. So we're here for the hotline, which is our core service. We have legal services based in Brooklyn that could serve all of New York City. And we're able to help people figure out what legal services might be helpful to them. We also know how to go into based-in with people. And many times people call just to learn what it means to use legal services. They may not be ready to use legal services, but if someone does need to use legal services for safety, we can help them pursue orders of protection, divorce, and certainly we're there to give education around that. And we go into based-in to help people with gets and negotiate that. And our third service, core service, is about education and prevention, and this is part of that. Getting out there, talking about these hard issues, going into schools, going into colleges, seminaries, yeshivas, base medrash, we go into shoals. We just have a new program we instituted called the Purple Fellows, where we have a national group of juniors in high school who they're finishing tomorrow night their first 8 weeks, where they're learning about domestic violence and how to be leaders in this issue, and really to surface this conversation, because we talk about the power of community and how we could empower each other, is we have to be able to talk about it. So those are our core services. Included in our education is also something called Shaolin Workshop, and my colleague Yeshaya Krause was here with Devorah, I think around 3 weeks ago, talking about Shaolin Workshop, which is a program not for people who are in abusive relationships, it's just for anyone in a relationship, to help them enhance their relationship skills, to foster that healthy relationship, learn how to have a good argument, learn how to negotiate with each other, and be healthier. So those are our 3 services. They are available to anyone in the community. It's at 888-883-2323. Also check out our website. There's a lot on there. I had to say, Deborah, that I was thinking about your work today. I love your website. We often, it is full of amazing information, and I highly encourage people to look at it. And there's so much there that you could learn about relationships and Shaolin bias and to think things through. And I love that we're able to work together, because there's times and place where Shaolin bias is the focus, and there's times and place where safety and thinking about other options is the focus. And I love that we kind of get that. So, and your website, I mean, I look at it as one of the ideal ways. There's so many resources. So I encourage people to take a look at that as well. So
I want to jump in with our website is adai.org, adaiad.org. I just want to add to Shana, what you were saying about the hotline. You don't always encourage divorce. You're not telling people what to do. Really, you're about listening and answering their questions and guiding them without enforcing or telling people.
Absolutely. And I think I'm let me highlight that. Like, it's really not about even like answering questions all the time. Sometimes it's just being a listening ear and like validating and mirroring what people are saying and experiencing. And people will call, and they can call back later, or they can, call back many years later. But we never, ever tell people what to do. And it's so important. And as we talk about domestic violence and what it actually is, and about how there's a loss of power and control in making decisions, we will never be in a place to make any decision on behalf of someone else. But we are there to help people explore and help think things through, and see what's best for them in their situation. So nobody is asked or forced to do anything that they're uncomfortable with or not ready for. So.
You have a great team there. So
yes, I'm very blessed.
Okay, so let's get into this topic of domestic abuse. When people talk about domestic abuse, let's at least for this call, let's be on the same definition of domestic abuse. What are we talking about?
Right. So we always like to start with that. I just want to mention that there's a Q&A function on the Zoom. So if anybody wants to write in a question, it's anonymous that way. Feel free to do that. Domestic abuse, it's really important that we all have the same definition. I think very often when someone says they're a victim of domestic violence, domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, we all have this image of black and blue marks. And we think about the pushing, shoving, hitting, slapping, choking, kicking, all that stuff. And that is certainly part of the definition of domestic violence. But if we were to walk away this evening with one takeaway, and I hope we have more than that, is that we have a broader definition for what domestic violence is. And people use different terms. The literature, like the academic literature, usually uses intimate partner violence, IPV. Something Deborah and I talked about is this new idea of talking about intimate terrorism. But basically, it is this dynamic within a relationship where one person uses power. It uses different tactics of power to obtain and maintain power and control over that other person, and there's a level of fear. So there's 3 components we're looking at. We're looking at a pattern of behaviors, we're looking at this dynamic of power and control, and there's fear. And I do have some graphics. I don't know if I want to bring it up right now, but I want everybody to think about those things. And so obviously physical abuse will encapsulate all 3, right? The person, there's power, there's control, there's fear. But there are many ways that someone who's abusive can have power and control, obtain and maintain power and control without being physically violent. Now, there's often like an overt or covert threat of physical violence, and then maybe there has been an incident or threat of an incident, but it doesn't have to happen frequently to know it can happen. And it doesn't even have to happen always. It just needs to know there's the capacity for it to happen, right? So we're looking about living in a situation, and when I reflected before this language of terrorism, and we could think about that is those of us who lived here after 9/11, or those of us who have spent time in Eretz Yisrael, know this experience where there are times where we know it's possible, right? There's a level of vulnerability, and there's like this yellow, orange, red zone of like what can happen, and it doesn't have to happen often, but we know there's a possibility of it. And that's what it's often described at when you're living in that relationship, is that I know there's always that potential for an attack, an assault. And that defines the relationship, and it impacts how we function, and it creates the environment of power and control. So what are those ways that people do it? I mean, that's really like, what are those ways? So if my takeaway is, how do we define it? You know, we're pattern behavior that's about obtaining power and control, and there's a level of fear. There's the physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, and there's certainly sexual abuse within marriage, something that we don't generally talk about. But there's coercion, there could be marital rape, there could be sexual assault during nida. It's something to think about and something for us to unpack together. There's emotional and psychological abuse. People often distinguish between the two. I put them together, but it's really attacking someone's sense of self, their sense of self-esteem, their sense of reality. And it could be done in so many different ways. It could be verbal attacks. It could be something that's like gaslighting, making the person feel like they're crazy, like they moving their keys or making them second guess themselves. And so much of that impacts the ability for the person to think clearly, right, and to trust themselves. A big dynamic around power and control is isolation. And, you know, everyone listening has gone through some level of social distancing, I think globally, and we know how challenging it is to feel isolated, to feel alone. And let's think about in a relationship, if you don't have access to your family and friends, and you're not being allowed to have those resources around you, how that impacts you, how it impacts your sense of self, how it impacts your ability to have support. So isolation is a big part of abuse. Someone just wrote in silent treatment for days, right? So it could be verbal attacks. It could also be withholding, right? There are ways that you power and control. So I think about the different ways that people could abuse is like the toolkit of the abuser or the person that hurts or the perpetrator. How can that person become powerful and have control of the other person? So through isolation, through having physical attacks, having sexual attacks, being emotionally and psychologically abusive. And it's important to remember, it's not about an incident, it's not about a fight, right? It's about a pattern. People asking for examples. Yeah, thank you for keeping me on track with that. I love the interaction. So some examples of isolation, right? And I see that as like one of the core dynamics of abuse. And I also see it that way because when someone's in a relationship and they don't have the external resources of friends, family, and colleagues, when they choose to look at the relationship and they choose to make any changes, they're alone. And it might have burnt bridges, and then they have to recreate and find and rebuild support systems. So what does it look like? It may look like, and it's very subtle, you know, nobody would marry someone, or I would say most people would not marry someone who on their first date like slaps them, right? And you know, assaults them. Like, it's a very subtle process. So it may be when they're dating and when they're engaged, it's about your friends are not good enough for you, or like, you know, we'll see in our community, like, you know, they're not as firm as you are, or, you know, you shouldn't hang out with them, or I really love you. There's a possessiveness, you know, I really love you. I want you to spend all my time with you. And there's no voice back to say, no, I want to hang out with my friends, or like, I need some space to do my schoolwork. And it slowly chips away at the person's ability to have those relationships to function, right? Some level of self-determination. So their ability, so isolation's one way someone really does it. And I see it as really important because later it really does impact people. I'm loving that people are writing things in the board. I don't know if you see it, but some of the other things we see here, and I was going to get to some of this, is digital abuse. And it's so interesting how that's changed. I think back to a situation I helped with. It was probably 2002. So it was a long time ago. And one of the dynamics in the engagement was that he gave her a beeper, right? This was like early cell phone years. So he gave her a beeper so he could always like be in touch with her and call her. And in some way that could feel sweet, right? But it became that he was like monitoring where she was and why wasn't she calling back in time? And it became like very intense that she couldn't take care of anything but take care of him. And it impacted her life, and she you know, her family was impacted. She eventually did break the engagement. She chose to break the engagement. And then you think that now the power of cell phones, which, you know, it's sitting right here and it's more powerful than any computer we had when I was growing up, and the ability to stalk someone that way, right? Or how it, you know, we use these apps. My children are still young. Hopefully you will not meet them tonight. They made a little appearance before, but hopefully you'll not meet them tonight. My children are young, but I know my friends who have teens, right? They like having things on the phone that says where their kids are all the time. It's a fabulous tool, right? But is that a great tool if you're being controlled. Like, how do you go to your therapist, right? And you don't want him to know about it because you want to have your own space to take care of it. And he knows exactly where you've gone. And I remember when I used to be, I used to treat people, we would sometimes, we wouldn't, usually your therapist you see every week at the same time. That's like a standard practice. But we couldn't do that because he'd be tracking her. So we would have to Thursday and then Tuesday and then Monday evening. And we'd have to think of ways, what would be the excuse that he would be able to see that what street she was on? Why was she always visiting there? Was it because her mother had physical therapy on the block and there was some sort of, way we thought about it? So there's this monitoring. And then, there are all these ways. I'm not a tech expert, but technological and digital abuse is really, it happens often. It happens in our community. People are, you could ghost someone's phone and know everything about them. So even if you're post-relationship, they could find things out about you. They know where you are. They could do things on social media. And we're not talking about the cyberbullying only, but they could, find out about you that way. And then, when you see that there's an intersection between sexual abuse and technology abuse. And, it's important to just say these things, but using pictures from within the relationship and using that as a threat, right? If you choose to leave me, or if you tell anybody what's going on here, those pictures I took of you, I will WhatsApp to our whole community. And, using that as a threat. So there's a lot that people, there's a lot going on with digital abuse. There was just a law we were involved in helping advocate for it. I found out it finally passed. It finally was signed by the governor in November, that includes digital abuse as part of an order of protection finally. So that, let's say the smart houses that some of us have, I do not, but some, if you might think you're crazy if you leave it's another way of gaslighting, right? Changing it from afar, knowing what's going on. So, so there's a lot of things. There's more. I can keep. So we're talking about, all these things.
I think we'll share the wheel, the domestic abuse wheel, so people can see all of it in detail. They can actually see it and read it. I just want to mention, just talk for a second about the financial abuse.
Yes.
What that would look like.
And we're getting a lot of good things. So financial abuse, someone already put up here, and it's very interesting. So financial abuse is not budgeting. And I think that's where we're going to make some distinctions, right? The same way as having argument in a healthy or healthy enough relationship is not verbal abuse. Budgeting as a family is not financial abuse. It's more of when one person has no access to any funding and has no voice about it. So, I kind of always joke on the side, we should all be on a budget, but that's very different in which someone has no access. So what it often looks like, and I'll share a few examples, is and I'll use she as the victim. We do see men who are also victim survivors, and I want to say that I'm going to use she because there are more reported cases of women. She works and her paycheck goes into an account that she has no access to, and then she has no money to buy food for her family. She may not be able to, I think of one woman that I worked with for many years. Her husband, she did not work, but that was because it was a choice they made. He had a high earning job. She didn't have enough money to buy food. That the agency where I worked, she would take home a bag of macaroni and tuna every week because she needed to feed her young children. And here is this family that, certainly they did not need to use a food pantry, but she had no access to it. And it would play out that she had no access to money for ingredients to make Shabbos, and he would do the shopping and show up literally 5 minutes before lift benching with raw material, raw food, and say, okay, make Shabbos. And, how does that play out, right? So here she was trying to pull off Shabbos, and that you think about how that impacts her sense of being. They're taking away, someone here wrote taking away a food stamp card. Yes, taking away food stamp, tracking every purchase, being on an absurd budget where you can't buy necessary products, and not because of financial issues in the family, because that is a way of controlling. I think about a young woman I worked with. She came to work with me after she walked out of the relationship with her baby in her arms. It escalated to physical violence. There were a lot of other violence before then. And she had always worked. She was in her late 20s when she got married, and they lived in Queens. She worked in the city, and part of their early relationship, he was like, "Oh, don't go to work yet. I love you so much. Let's have breakfast. Let's spend time together in the morning." And she was always late to work, and then he would call the work over and over every day. And eventually, listen, I'm also an employer, and eventually, an employee who comes to work every day late, and spends the whole day on the phone with their husband is no longer employed, right? And so she became more and more dependent on him. And that was really the start of when it became very abusive. And so it was part of his power and control. You know, and she did rebuild her life, but it was after it became physically violent that she was like, this can't work anymore. Her child was right there. So, I mean, financial abuse is very real. Someone wrote here, and it's interesting, people should hide money for themselves. We could talk about, I don't know if we're gonna talk about today, about what it means to do a safety plan and to think about like what is necessary to, like what we should be doing to prepare. I don't know that that's our focus today, but we could go think about that.
We can have a follow-up, but our focus is more about how to recognize what is abuse, that somebody, if you or somebody and you, a loved one, somebody in shul next to you, what might be going on for them. Shana, you described a lot of abusive behaviors. Some of that can be due to dysfunction.
Yeah.
So it can feel just as abusive. Does it matter if it's from what?
You know, it doesn't matter. So there still is, I mean, people will describe it, there still is a distinction between, you know, I think of a continuum of being, and I could bring up, I could think of it as a healthy, or I call healthy enough relationships, where I hope many of us are blessed to be in, where there's, you know, there's times where ups and downs, but there's a sense of respect, there's a sense of honesty, trust, and there's some level of like equal power. That does not mean you both, you know, you might make decisions differently. You might choose to let one person, you know, take care of finances, one person take care of educational choices. Like there might, but there's some sort of like sense of collaboration of how those choices are made. And it may even be that you choose to be in a very traditional gender rolled relationship, but there's voice. And I talk about voice a lot. And I don't know if everybody will relate to that, but when you move over on the continuum from healthy or healthy enough to high conflict dysfunctional, however you want to name it, into abusive, some of the behaviors may look very similar, but it really comes down to me is like, is there voice? Is there a sense of responsibility? Is there a sense of accountability? In an abusive relationship, an abuser will almost never take any responsibility. They'll basically play down anything they've done. They could have an extremely violent, physically violent episode, and the next morning, like, just pretend it never happened. Like, where did you get that black and blue mark from? Like, completely, you know, taking no responsibility. If it comes to a point that they feel threatened and they have, you know, they're almost forced to go to help, they won't, there's very little sense of like, okay, I'm gonna like do the work necessary.
They're in a good place. They want to be in control. So why would they change it?
It's always interesting. Is that a good place? I mean, who wants to be in a relationship?
I mean, no, but they feel
right. Yes, they will often feel that like this is what they but when you're talking about high conflict and dysfunctional, listen, the experience might be similar. Often there might be a little bit more sense of like, I need to get help. There might be, but you know, it comes down to what you said before. We can't tell people what to do, right? So in the same way, we can't tell someone that they have to leave a relationship. We can't tell people they could have to stay in a relationship. So even if someone's the person's has, you know, severe and persistent mental illness that remains absolutely untreated and has a personality disorder, and like, and none of that means you're going to have an abusive relationship. It doesn't even mean you'll have a bad relationship, but right. But if you don't have the skills and you don't seek out the skills, then it probably be a really tough relationship. But the same way, we can't tell those people they have to stay because it's not abusive. Like, people really need to be respected, that they're allowed to make the decisions. And, you know, so much of this is all about power and control. And when we're in the place of helping, we need to remember that we don't want to to replicate the same dynamic of power and control, right? So much of us, and I think that that's like really what happens, right, is that, you know, we see this happening, and we'll talk about what you might see, but like, we see this happening, so we go in there and we rush in there, like, you need to leave. And though it's coming from a place of like love and care, it's basically the same dynamic of you're telling that person that they can't make their own decision, and we're going to tell them what to do. Now, there are ways, and Abital, my colleague's going to speak about it more in a few weeks, but there are ways of how to speak about it. But, and we have to remember that. So someone may be living in a high conflict, dysfunctional relationship. Sometimes, you know, from a professional view, we do a lot of fatality and injury risk assessments. It's a hard thing to talk about. It's not, you know, but so sometimes high conflict relationships can be dangerous. kind of weird to say, right? Because if someone's completely out of control, they may behave very dangerously. So we'll look at some of those behaviors, but no one, I don't think anyone can tell anyone what they have to do in their relationship. I think we need to, we talk about the power of the community and how we could create community is really about, I think, taking a stand back and saying like I can't tell you what to do. What can I do to be supportive?
Shana, a lot of people feel shame that they are in such a relationship, and so they don't talk about it, and they're suffering alone. And yes, our community has added some layer of stigma to it, so it makes it even more difficult. And that's what we're trying to help people realize, that we don't have to add any more to their pain and destigmatize. But because people are hiding it for whatever reasons, and there's lots of reasons why people want to hide it, they want to save face or whatever, what might we notice and going on for them so that we can start a conversation perhaps, or start a way of helping them?
So, what we often hear from people, like when I told you, we get calls from people who are like the sister or a mother or a cousin. It's very frequently that there's been this break in the relationship. Like they're no longer who they were, or they're not as available, or it's very retracted from, they're not there anymore. And that's often the red flag that we see, is this place where they're isolated from their family and friends, and people are worried. And the conversation usually goes, well, do you think that means she's being abused or he's being abused? I'm like, it's possible, but we don't know. It could be that someone is going through a hard time, or is postpartum, or we can think of 1,000 reasons, but then that's when we express support and concern, right? That's when we say, I haven't seen you in a while. I'm concerned about you. Is everything okay? And if it turns out that she's just going through I'm not saying just, but it's not related to abuse, then maybe you could support her otherwise. We want to support people. So I would say like one of the big red flags is, her changing, really changing. If she was someone who was always very social, and then she's just really not social, and to like look at it, like, is it because like she had a lot of new responsibilities, or is it because she's not allowed to be social? There are big changes in who she is, and I use she, but it could be he is. I would express some level of concern. I don't know that I would say, I'm scared your husband's abusing you. We don't want to do that. But, language, very open language. You're like, I miss you. I'm wondering about you. Is there anything I could do for you? I'm thinking about you. And if you see something that does feel dangerous, to say, I'm concerned about your safety. Is everything okay? I'm here for you. And then
So when you say change, I'm wondering, does this happen? Oh, does it usually happen in the beginning of a marriage, or can this pop up 10 years into a marriage or later?
I'm just going to reflect on anecdotal, because I'm not thinking of literature. I would say almost all the women I've worked with, and I work mostly in the frum community, and so they've been married. They're not just in relationships. Will say that they saw red flags when they were dating and they were engaged. And then it became more and more. And often it will happen more after a pregnancy or during a pregnancy. And it's very, I cannot think of any cases where it was like a healthy enough relationship for 20 years and all of a sudden he's very abusive. Maybe if there was a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, like there's something very extreme that happened, there might be some behavioral change, but this is something that happens throughout a relationship. It may be more subtle early on in the relationship. And someone gave a good example once that, also if you call a house, you can't reach your friend anymore. Like how accessible is that person to other people, which reflects back. But it does not happen. I think that one woman I worked with, and she was in the marriage for a very long time. I mean, she came to me when she was marrying her younger children. So we're talking 20, 25 years. And she said, something didn't feel right when I was engaged. And she said I was an older single. I think she was 23 or 24, but perhaps that felt older to her. I guess things change. I don't know that nowadays that is as significant, but okay, it matters what your community is. And she said the things that I noticed, I said, well, what kind of things? So she goes, when we were engaged for my birthday, he bought something that he knew I didn't care for, but he wanted in our house. And I took a step back and I was like, well, that's what she goes, I didn't care for a boom box. I don't know if everybody here knows what that is, but like, you know, the big, it's dating this whole thing, but it was a long time ago. And I just didn't care for it, but I knew he always wanted one. He was like one of those things he really wanted us to get it. So for my birthday, when we were engaged, he bought this huge boom box as a gift to me. And I was like, why would you buy something I don't want? And she was looking back, that was like one of those red flags. And then she starts talking about how she had no voice in how they planned their wedding, and she got none of the kibudim for her family. You know, like he made that into like, and she just went on and on. But I thought that was a really interesting way for her to think about it. And I said, so what was it like for you when that happened? She goes, I had this feeling that it didn't feel right, but I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have language for it. I mean, this is going back 35 years at this point, you know, this is, you know, a long time ago. And I didn't have land, you know, and I felt pressure, and I moved forward and you know, married, children. Maybe at the time she almost had a grandchild, honestly. And I thought that was very interesting. And, you know, when I think about that situation and that feeling of like something doesn't feel right, you know, it doesn't mean when something doesn't feel right, we say, oh, break an engagement, right? That's not the response. When something doesn't feel right, you explore it, right? You explore it. And, you know, if something doesn't feel right and you bring it up to your husband and you say, you know, I just didn't like how that was, and he gets very angry, that's something else to explore. If he goes, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't realize I was inconsiderate, and, you know, is able to kind of navigate that with you, that's also a different signal, right? That's, you know, and you're looking at both, right? I mean, so nobody's going to say, oh, break your engagement, he bought you the wrong birthday gift. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if something feels not good, right? You know, my colleague Avital talks about that uh-oh feeling, but there's that pit in your stomach. He's like, oh, this feels off. Don't ignore it. Like, you know, don't ignore it. It's very, you know, it's, they take the time. And, you know, we're blessed in our community to have a lot of mental health professionals that are very skilled. And it's really, that's the time. Can I plug mental health professionals? That's the time to see a mental, it's really the time to talk to a mental health professional where they could be objective, they have training around this, and they can help you think through, is this, you know, your thing, is this real, or is there something here that you really need to figure out if it's still a good fit?
I want to jump in on that engagement piece. Our engagements are very short, so if you have something bothering you, you have to jump in pretty quickly and talk to somebody, because
Yes.
it may take sessions, and at the same time you're planning a wedding, and at the same time you're exploring if you should go forward with it. So it's
such a stressful time, yeah. But it's important. It's like it's important. And you know, we have Shaolin Workshop, which is not for abusive clients, but it's, you know, it's for relationships. And I'll tell you, we'll meet with people and we'll be talking about communication skills, and our facilitators, not often, but will kind of call me or call one of the other professionals saying like something didn't feel great, like something felt off, and then we'll reach out. And we won't say, oh, you're in an abusive relationship, but oh, maybe you want to get a little bit more guidance. Maybe there's a little more for you to explore. You know, we all would rather prevent the situation than have to intervene later. So
I asked the question about when it falls out, if it's early marriage or throughout, because it's not we're not only looking to help people in early marriage, which is maybe when it might start. Someone may be in it for 15 years, like you described. Yes. So it really could be anybody. It's not as if we should only be looking at young people and saying,
oh, absolutely, yeah.
It could really be someone who's been in for a long time.
And there's so many reasons, you know, when I interrupt as you will, but when I think about, you know, we present all these terrible ways that people live and what the situation, the question I always get next is like, why is she still there, right? And we can think about so many reasons, and that's like a discussion on its own, but there are so many reasons we touch on. And so if someone's listening, or you know someone, you know, we've worked with people who it is not atypical to work with people who choose to figure out what they want to do next after their children are married. Like it really may be, you know, what is that, 30 years into a marriage, 35 years into marriage, they've married off, you know, a large family, Kanai, and they're kind of like, now I have to figure out what's not working for me. It could be people who are, you know, 15 years in. It's, you know, I think about like the many reasons why people may not come forward early. And I hate when people say, why doesn't she just leave? I think we're putting the onus and the burden on the person who's being hurt to make all these decisions. But you know, the other way of framing it is like, what are the barriers to coming forward? Like, what is it that makes it hard? And everybody here listening could probably type in 15 things that come to mind. Like, what's hard, right? She loves him or he loves her. That's true. That's really true. You could be in a lot of pain and still love someone, right? And we have to allow for that. You know, it's scary. It's how do I financially even think about this? Is, you know, we go on and, you know, it feels so shameful. I mean, I think something that we hear a lot is like, what would my life look like? Right? Like we live in very traditional communities, even, you know, like we live in 2-parent family communities for the most part, and there's a structure, and we love our communities, and we have a lot of joy, and we this is like, we choose to live in our communities, and what will it be like to be that single parent? Like, how do I even think about
That's the part that, some of it is on her own, and so, like, what will I be financial, so, how can I support myself? Those are her own, possibly, but things that come from the community, like, how would I fit into this community, is something that we really have to work on.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I contemplate that all the time.
Internal, like the stigma, or people not wanting to let their children play with someone
Right.
of a divorced family. Like, what is that? Like, why?
Right.
We have
It was
to.
interesting. Someone said to me recently, was talking to a woman who was post divorce after a very violent relationship, and she said one of the hardest things for her was that nobody would come to her for a Shabbos meal anymore. Right, like, so much of her identity, what she found joy in, is us hosting other people for Shabbos meals. She was, lots of people invited me and my children for Shabbos meals. Like, I was that person that everybody made sure to invite, which is beautiful. It is beautiful that she was included in that way. But but she was like, I felt like an outsider because so much of my social life was me cooking these beautiful meals, and I still want to be able to do that, but nobody was comfortable anymore coming, and I felt like an outsider. And I was like, whoa, that's something, like, and I was like, we have to have a focus group, because, like, how do we create the place in our community for people to remain active, vibrant members of the community if their lives look a little, that they're not the conventional, like, would that allow people to consider other safe options? It was really, to me, very eye-opening when you hear a comment like that, right? It was, but there are all these reasons, and sometimes, I guess we do focus a lot on younger marriages or newer marriages, but if you just think about what our lives look like, right? Like, just a normal, like, the healthy enough lives where we're working and our children are in school, and there's the physical and the dental appointment, and maybe our kid needs an IEP, and then we also have to deal with everything else in our lives, right? We all busy all the time. Like, that's just the reality. And then to throw in there, okay, now I'm going to leave this relationship and somehow reestablish myself, deal with court based in, possibly child protective services. Like, it is expecting people to be super people. When I teach clinical, I often do some clinical training. I have this diagram where I have all these systems, and I put in there a very modestly dressed superwoman, where I think that there's an expectation that, okay, this is happening, that you make the change, and then just, and that's just not the experience. It's almost superhuman, right? To be able to just say, okay, I'm gonna do all this. And so you will often meet people who have been in relationships because there's a sense of denial, because that's how they have to function, right? I'm not gonna look at this because I have to take care of all of this, and I do this really well, and this part is okay enough, I'm gonna do this. And then when I have some room, I think COVID's been very interesting, which, is not the focus, but, there's been an escalation of violence. We do not see families that were healthy jump into abusive. That's just not how it works. You might see families that were high conflicts get into abusive, and you might see relationships that had non-physical violence become physically violent, right? Because there's so much stress. But I think COVID in general, and it's not a domestic violence reflection, is that it's like a mirror to our lives. We've all spent so much time at home, and trying to just being with ourselves and managing all this. And I think all of us have seen things, like, in the mirror of things that we like about our lives, and there are things that we're like, oh, this isn't good. Like, I need to figure this out. And I think, we've had a pretty significant increase to calls to our hotline. And some of it is that when there is safety to call, and obviously during the shelter in place, it was much harder, but it's like, wow, it may have gotten worse, and it's always been there, and I see it more now, right? And it, in many ways, is very easy, not comfortable, but easy not to leave, because it's so hard to leave. So yes, we're here for people who've been married. I've worked with people in their 70s and 80s, grandparents, great grandparents who this was a time where it made sense for them to explore what they need for themselves. And that does not mean they're leaving, but what they need for themselves. It may mean they just need some more support. They may need to be able to find other things in their lives that make them have a sense of empowerment. Sometimes it might sound trite, but sometimes it's finding hobbies or pursuing a profession that if it's safe to do that, so that they have another identity other than a relationship that isn't healthy. I know. I've been talking a lot. I want to hear more about some of the
Can we
questions.
talk about what happens for the children in a relationship where the children are not being abused necessarily, except of course they are being abused by watching this go on, but they're not the subject of the abuse.
Right. So it's very different when they're the subject of the abuse. Many survivors will believe, and the abuser might believe, that the children have no idea what's going on. They basically always know something's going on. So we just need to be real about it. And it does impact them sense of safety. There's often a sense, they either align very much with the victim and they might put themselves in harm's way, or many of them align very much with the abuser because would you rather be on the side of being thrown at or being the one throwing, right? Like it's a safety mechanism. People will often say to me, does that mean everybody who grows up with this, I don't know if this is where you're going with it, but means that they're going, no, okay, good. It's going to either, there's like this language out there is like, if you grow up with it, it means you're going to be abused or you're going to be abusive. I don't know if you've heard that. I often hear that.
The literature doesn't support that.
It does not support it. It does not support it. And it's also, to me, as a therapist and as a Jew, it's a terrible sentiment. I think it's very fatalistic. It doesn't allow for healing, whatever you want to think about it. And I don't see anything positive about that epitaph. Like people just say it, and I hear it all the time. I hear it from the women saying, if I stay in this, it means my son's going to be this, and my daughter's going to be abused, or it's for sure, even if I don't stay, it means it's going to happen. No, it doesn't mean that. I mean, we all have great capacity for resiliency and healing, and I wouldn't be in the work I did if I didn't believe that. And I'm going to meet my son. I'm working here, Steve. Thank you, Boo. I think it's so the children will experience, symptoms of stress and trauma. I mean, they will. Because they're living in a traumatic home. So it could be the whole gamut of things. It may not be severe all the time, but, there's anxiety, there's depression, there might be, decreased appetite, there may be sleep issues, there could be hypervigilance. I mean, that it's part of the
teachers can notice it because it could show up in the classroom.
Absolutely. And it won't be that, and it won't be that they come with the black and blue marks where many teachers are taught, they're trained to look out for the child abuse, but it may be that, they'll notice other things. They might notice that the mom, typically the victim or the isn't able to support the person through their learning, right? Because they're too busy surviving, so they can't do the 15 minutes of reading every night and everything else that is expected of parents in schooling. So, but I think we need to stay with the fact that children are very resilient. People are very resilient. There's great hope for healing, and we just need to help people get to the place where they can do that, right? And do that safely. So, yeah, I mean, it's certainly hard. I would say children are often the motivator to leave a relationship. I will say that,
So I want to talk about what does the abuser look like?
Yeah.
And really.
It could be anyone. They don't have, they're not funny looking. They're not all unemployed or dysfunctional. They could be, I'm not saying everybody's an abuser, but they are frequently people who in the outside are very confident and very well liked and charming. And at home, they are everything but. And it's certainly part of why it's hard to come forward, because who would believe that this, Rav, doctor, a president of the shul, whatever the role is in the community that you're coming from, that has some level of prestige, but not only prestige, like communal engagement and, giving and generosity, right? How can that person at home be completely different? We had a phone call to our hotline that I think about often. It was a woman who shared that she and her husband were just honored by their school. So there are obviously people who were generous, who were really engaged, and she called. She had taken our number out of a newspaper 4 years before, and she had folded it and put it into her little wallet, like one of those, like she described it as in one of those sections, we have those, you put old receipts, and she described, she put it there, and she just couldn't attend to it, and her kids were getting older, and she decided that she needs to figure out a plan, because this wasn't long term. But the description of her saying, she's like, we were just honored by our day school, our yeshiva, and I'm talking, and she decided that her plan was that she's gonna she was calling from her workplace. She had been out of the workforce, raising the children. Now she was going back to the workforce. And part of what her feeling of empowerment was to start working, to see how she could take care of herself and then consider what the next steps would be. But to me, it was just so compelling to think about that way. Here was a man that was just honored by his community. And what she was describing is living with a terrorist, an absolute terrorist. And her children witnessed this. And what are children thinking? My whole school is here honoring and I'm sure those kids got up there and gave a little cute speech, right? We've been to these dinners, and right, like we know them, the poem of the, they're very endearing. And at the same time, the child at the same time is like, I'm gonna go home and he's gonna, hit my mother, and I'm gonna hear it happen. It might be in the other room. And so what is that like? So it could be absolutely anyone. There's certainly abusers that are not, high functioning. They're everybody, they're absolutely everybody. And so one thing we could do as a community is that when we do hear, if somebody does disclose to us, is not to sit there in disbelief, like, how's that possible? He just gave a shear. It's possible, right? How's it possible? Even if, she's an abuser, it's possible. It could be absolutely, it could be anyone.
And talk about being anyone can be the victim. It's like
anyone, right? And that's also right. And it's not. And when you meet someone, they themselves can be professionals. They can be very competent. They could be the head of the PTAs. They could just be honored by the school, right? The victim is not always someone who comes across as disheveled. Now, sometimes the abuse will make her come across as very mentally ill or disheveled, and that's part of the abuse, so that the community will really align with him. And that's, one dynamic. But often, she's just one of any of us, right? She looks like any of us. She'll function within the community, outside her family in this way, and it can be very confusing. And then inside live in this place of terrorism.
Right. And the control is different in every relationship. It's different. Like in this case, when you're saying that she's the head of whatever, he wants to really keep it hidden, so he lets her out in public.
Absolutely.
And he lets her, or he encourages her to have the job, so it's a better alibi in a way.
In some way, she could be a physician, but but you could say, we go back to the financial abuse, she could have a high earning, job, and at the same time, she might have no control of finances. She might have not a penny to be able to, it's like, it doesn't have to look a certain way. And certainly the word alibi is there. It's like a facade, right? It's really like how can she say she's abused? She has, this role in the community. She's an empowered woman. Well, she may be in that part of her life. It may be a way of but she is not at home. It could be absolutely anyone on either side. Absolutely anyone.
And there's nothing, and the thing with this is that there's nothing that she does to aggravate it or to bring it on. This is a very intentional plan of his to.
Well, it's about power and control. So there, we will say, there are survivor victims who will say, I know I egged him on right now, but they'll say, but that was the only way I could manage the situation. Like, I knew that there was an incident going to happen, and I'd rather it happen before Shabbos than at Friday night dinner. So if I kind of made it happen now, it gave me some power, and I got it out of the way. So, but it's not because, when that's the difference, right? Someone discloses and you say, so what'd you do? It isn't about what I did, because it's never okay to be abusive, right? It doesn't matter if, you're under a lot of stress. That behavior is never okay. We're all responsible for our own behavior. So even if she did something that made him upset, we all do things to our partner or spouse that may make them upset. I mean, at least I do. But the response, it's about response, right? And having the entitlement to respond in a way so it's not her fault. It's not any victim's his fault either if he's the victim. It's a behavior. It's a choice.
It's not like it takes two to tango. Sometimes when there's a power differential, it's not takes two to tango.
It's a power differential, and it's counterindicated to go to marital therapy. It's absolutely dangerous. And
let's talk to that for a minute. When people suggest that you go to therapy, and the therapy would be individual therapy. Individual therapy, if she can.
Right. But so it should not be.
Or a Rav.
Right.
When someone goes to a Rav.
It should not be a Shaolin bias counseling with a Rav. I mean, if there's any power differential, if there's any level of coercive control, which we call non-physical abuse or physical abuse, they should not be speaking to a Rav about Shaolin bias. I mean, this is not about Shaolin bias. This is about power differential This is dangerous. And it puts the victim at greater risk when they engage in that, right? You're basically getting, you know, marital therapy is about both people taking responsibility for the dynamic. But a victim does not need to take responsibility for the dynamic of being abused, right? That's not her or his fault. So when people go to marital therapy, and people go, and it's the first stop, because that's what we do, right? We go to the couples counselor, go to the Rav, first of all, go to the Rav, the mashpia, the whatever is in your community, and you know, and then the Rav may work with them for a bit and realize it's not working, so they say, oh, there's a really good marriage therapist, and you know, and the marriage therapist, you know, the ones that are more skilled will kind of sniff it out and say, oh, this doesn't seem to be the place for this, you know, we're going to put you into individual therapy first, and then, you know, hopefully the victim will get the support she needs in that, to be safe and to have validation and some level of healing. And then I don't know what happens always to the abuser. That's not what we're talking about tonight. I don't know that, you know, I don't know that is always effective, but certainly people should not be going to Shaolin bias, working on Shaolin bias, or going to marital therapy when there's abuse.
Right. But the challenge always is that people don't recognize it or don't admit that it's abuse,
right,
or they don't describe it fully as abuse even
right,
to themselves, and so they do try to believe that it's just a Shaolin bias issue.
right.
And then they end up falling into this trap. And then just imagine how it plays out is that, you know, what's going on, and she's not allowed to say anything. So it seems like nothing's really going on because she's not going to say anything because I'm going to get
right there. And if she does say something, she'll be beaten when she goes back home, or there'll be some maybe not physical violence, but there'll be some level of abuse when she goes back home. Yeah, it's really, which is why these conversations are important, where people can say, you know, this, be able to say themselves, yeah, I may not be able to use the word abuse about my relationship, but this is not about me. It's not takes two to tango. This isn't about what I'm doing. This is about a behavior that he is the abuser, or she is the abuser, is choosing to do to have power and control. And I don't have a voice. I have no voice, and I'm afraid. And you know, and to put out there that you call us and we can help you find someone, but they're like throughout. I mean, this is mostly New York City listening, I'm assuming. There's a lot of free services. Absolutely free services, because if you're an abuse victim, you don't want to use your insurance, right? Because you don't want the EOB going back to the house so he knows that you're seeing a therapist, and you might not have access to funds to see a therapist. So don't feel that you have to go see a private therapist to get the help you need. There are very skilled practitioners out there that are available in programs to help you. So
and people who really understand our firm dynamics.
Oh yeah, there are firm programs, and that's what we're here for. I mean, it's really our mission to make sure that people get the service they need, and they don't have to leave the community to do that. You know, that we're here. Yeah.
I want to talk to the one who wants to support, and I think it's very important that they don't say go to a Rav, or say use need Shaolin bias, in the same way that we don't want them to go to a Rav who doesn't know, that may point them in the direction of working on Shaolin bias. We ourselves don't want to point them into the direction of Shaolin bias. And secondly, also it's very important is not to go to him and say, how dare you do that to her?
Right. So I'd say like the two principles. If someone discloses to you, don't do anything that would put her safety at risk. Like that, like just make that your don't do anything. So if
do
you're
no harm.
Do no harm. There we go. That's the right way. Do no harm. You know, like she's going to share with you. You might not know what to say. It's really hard to know what to say. You know, even I don't always know what to say, right? You know, that's what I've been trained in. Like, it's hard to know what to say. But what you don't want to do is, obviously, you should keep confidence. You don't want to tell other people. It's been shared with you. And you don't want to go to a Rav or someone who's going to have influence on him and start getting involved in the dynamic. That's not how it will not change, and it will just put her at higher risk for disclosing it. So certainly don't tell anyone. And the response is not to go to, and you know, I think that Rabbanim have a beautiful role in our community, and I think it's very important. But particularly if the Rav is his Rav also, it's a problem to go to him, right? And we are also a community that has many from mental health professionals that are hashkafically in line with our community, but are trained to really help someone think these through. And I'm biased. I like to say I'm one of them. So you know, but I have many colleagues out there, wonderful people who are available to help people think this through, and we'll be able to help with safety. And safety is always the operating. I think that's what we always think about first. I mean, you know, you call our hotline, the first thing we ask you is, a safe time to talk? Even if you called, we ask them if it's a safe time to talk, because we don't always, people are not always aware of their own safety. That's our standard, because do no harm. At the most basic level, we don't want to put anybody's risk. So if someone does disclose this to you, do no harm, call us. We'll help you think about what to say. We're here for you. Text us. We'll help you think it through. There's a lot of information on our website also.
I think the information on the website is great. I think that talking to someone about the specifics of the case, and the Shaolin Task Force is there for that. I would say don't do anything on your own. If you're not skilled in it, and even if you're skilled in it, sometimes you're too emotionally involved. It's nice to get an objective opinion, a knowledgeable opinion of what to do. So even if you're slightly suspicious that something might be going on, get support of what you yourself should get support. And even if it means a therapist, even if it means paying a therapist to get some support and guidance of what to do, because you definitely don't want to make it worse.
And you know, but again, don't let payment get in the way. Like there are really, like really, yes, sir. But like really, call us.
There's enough
out there. We are not alone. Like our community is really has moved so much that we have these services. And, you know, and I have wonderful, other agencies I work with that I'd say do a really, really good job. If someone does disclose it to you, you know, your stance is that they need to be believed. They absolutely just need to be believed. You are not there to investigate it. That's not your role whatsoever. And, you know, it is, thank you for trusting me with that. This must be a hard thing for you to talk about. What can I do for you? You know, I'm here for you. And then she said, well, I'm going to stay with them and do it. Whatever you need. And then, you know, one thing I often, you know, I consult in a lot of cases like this, and one thing that comes up a lot is that it's really hard to see someone make these poor decisions, you know, or what you consider to be a poor decision, I should say. And it's frustrating, and the relationship may be very one way for a while, and that's what it is. And to accept that for that time, this will not be your friend that could support you back. But if you can't kind of look past that and remain an anchor and a place of hope for them, then they'll become more and more isolated and have less and less resources. So sometimes it feels like really hard to just kind of be that person that says, I'm here for you. Whatever you decide to do, I'm here for you. You call me anytime, I'll be here for you, right? And you get so frustrated, you need to find your support somewhere else, so that person has some sort of you know, someone out there who's going to believe them and help them, because it is so isolating. And and that's many of the reasons people stay and are in danger. Let's not worry about staying. People remain in danger and have real risk to their safety is because they don't believe anyone will believe them. Perhaps they have told people and the question is, oh, what did you do? Or there must be more to that story, right? Or, you know, you're married, try it more. And then it puts them at much higher risk. So.
And like you said, pregnancy and right after birth is one of the bigger times. So when they're already vulnerable, and the hormones, and is when they really need support.
But I wonder if that's a lot. I mean, you know, and I don't know that the studies say first pregnancy versus later pregnancy, but I think that I think a lot of it is in some way, once you have a child together, once you're pregnant, there's a different level of investment, right? It feels like a different risk. And I think that the abusive party knows that. Like, it's much, in some ways, simpler to leave a marriage when there's no children, and it's certainly more complicated later. And it's a different decision. So people, you know, it puts people, there's risk. So just, you know, believe and do no harm. Do no harm. And we're here for you. Like, Deborah is very knowledgeable. She'll help steer people in the right direction. We're available, and there are many colleagues throughout the country, I'd say. Most large Jewish communities have domestic violence departments.
We list them all on our website, and I think, Shana, you have a lot of them on your website?
Yeah, and you call us, we'll connect you to them. And there are some incredible people out there that are available to help.
So if something's happening in the community, it's believe them. It's probably true.
Probably true. And you know, it's not your job to figure it out. You're not the judge and jury. It just isn't. It isn't.
If someone is, you know, someone who's reaching out needs support, whether the whole story is exactly the way it is presented, it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's perception, and some people could tolerate more, and maybe you could have tolerated that you know, or you think you could have, or you want to believe that you could have, and it's not, you know, she can't, or he can't, and that's just what it is. And they need support, whether you believe that you should be support, you know, whether you believe that's a real problem or not. If they're reaching out for
Right.
support, that's what we do. We help people.
We help people. We help people.
That's what communities do for
That's
each
what-
other. And that's the
Yeah.
idea, is to really fully understand what might be going on for somebody. And next time, Vital 11 will be talking about more about how we can support, the language you might use, a language you ought not to use, and how to be thinking about people. So we're looking forward to Vital's conversation
Yeah,
as well.
it's fantastic.
So Shana, this has been great. I think it was very
Fantastic.
informative.
Thank
If anyone has
you.
any questions,
Absolutely.
definitely put it in the chat. We'll keep it on for another minute or so. We'll read your questions. We'll try to get the answers to you however possible, whether it's you give us your information or we'll maybe put into a future article, because we put articles on COL all the time or other places. So we'll try to get the answers to you. But again, anything that you share with myself or Shaolin Task Force is always confidential. We would never share, and by training and by nature, those of us who go into the helping field are non-judgmental. We really are just there to help.
Right.
So definitely reach out.
And you can always, our 888-883-2323 is both a text line and a phone line. So if you want to text in a question even, if we can't get to it today, we'll be in touch with you. We'll first ask if it's safe to be in touch with you, but you know, feel free to reach out with any questions, and that's what we're here for. Thank you for attending. Thank you for being here for the community. This is what it takes to make positive change.
We'll peck away at it, and we're going to make that change.
That's me to it.
Thank you so much, Shana.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.